An inept boss who didn't know I held the patent to the system fired me. How amusing Monday would be. I remember the first time I saw him. Maxwell Granger walked into the main office, as if he'd been handed the world on a silver platter. Tailored black suit, gleaming Rolex, confidence oozing from every inch of his 6-foot frame, and not a single clue about what we actually did. "Call me Max," he said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "I like everything agile, fast, and efficient. We're going to do great things starting now." There was an awkward silence, followed by the typical forced applause you hear in corporate meetings or kindergarten plays. I remained quiet, arms crossed. I had been at Exora Systems for almost 9 years. I had survived for restructurings and a corporate acquisition. I knew how the game was played, but Max, he was about to learn the hard way. The first week was chaos. Max canceled our regular project review meetings and replaced them with vision and strategy syncs. He fired 3 middle managers before Thursday, 2 of them by email. Then he started meddling with our main software product, Clueless, about the system architecture. That product, by the way, I built 6 years ago after a failed acquisition that almost sank us. I designed a new back-end infrastructure, optimized, secure, scalable. And I didn't just design it, I patented it in my name. It was a protective measure recommended by the former CEO, who told me, "Emma, if you ever leave, we'll be begging you to come back." It was all in my employment contract, one of those clauses most executives never read. But Max hadn't read anything. By the second week, he started calling me tech lead instead of my actual title, Director of Systems Architecture, a minor offense, but telling. He'd edit my eye contact in meetings, interrupt me mid-sentence, and praise junior employees for ideas I had already presented. The classic playbook: minimize, discredit, discard. I kept my cool as always, but I started documenting everything. Then came Friday morning. Max walked into my office, leaned against the doorframe like he was acting in a bad corporate drama, and said, "Emma, can we talk?" I gestured to the chair in front of me. He didn't sit. "I'm going to be direct," he said with that tone some men use when they think honesty is a favor. "You've been here a long time, perhaps too long. Things are changing, and we need people who move at a different pace." I raised an eyebrow. I'm letting you go. Effective immediately. We've decided your position is redundant. Of course, you'll receive a severance package. HR has the documents. It was so rehearsed, so arrogant, I almost laughed. Instead, I leaned back in my chair and watched him. He truly had no idea, not a single clue, about what I had, no idea what that line in my contract meant. No idea that without me, without my written consent, the company couldn't legally continue using the system that managed 82% of its operations. But I didn't say anything. I just smiled. A quiet, polite, deliberate smile. "Understood," I said, standing up to shake his hand. He didn't take it, just nodded and turned around like he was already done with me. As he walked out, he threw one last comment over his shoulder. "I'm not going to waste another penny on an incompetent employee who peaked 5 years ago." My smile didn't falter. "Good luck, Max." He stopped at the door, probably confused by how calm I was. Then he left. I packed my things methodically. A few personal belongings, a plant I'd miraculously kept alive for 5 years, and a USB drive with nothing but photos from the last team retreat. As I walked through the open office, some heads turned, some avoided my gaze in shame, others offered slight gestures of sympathy. No one said anything. That's how fear spreads in places like this. Silently. When I reached my car, my hands were shaking. Not from sadness, from adrenaline. I wasn't angry, not yet. I was curious. How long would it take them to realize what they had done? I knew the answer. Monday. The weekend passed like a slow storm, quiet, dense information, thick with static in the air. I didn't tell anyone I'd been fired. Not my sister, who always said I worked too much. Not my best friend, who would have arrived with red wine and a 5-step revenge plan. much less my ex-husband, who once told me I was too intense and married to my job. I needed silence, space, perspective. Friday night, I went for a walk through the city, passing closed cafes and dimly lit bookstores, letting the cold air soothe the sting of betrayal. I wasn't mourning the job. I was mourning the offense, the ignorance, the idea that someone who had never written a line of code could come in, erase years of effort and sacrifice, and call it redundant. By Saturday morning, I was ready to act. I pulled out the contract from my personal files. It was all there, in black and white, the patent in my name, the revised and notarized clause, a carefully worded section granting me full rights to the system architecture I built. Nexera had a license to use it, one that required my explicit involvement for renewals, updates, or scaling. And that license expired on Monday. I let out a small laugh, not because it was funny, but because the timing was simply poetic. At 3 p.m., I sent an email to Nexera's legal department, not from my old corporate account. The account I wrote from was already deactivated, but from my personal address. The subject line was simple: Notice of Intellectual Property Usage Expiration. Requires immediate attention. I kept it factual, calm, no dramatics. Just a reminder that, per our licensing agreement, the company's right to use the Inspire system expired at midnight on Sunday, unless renegotiated directly with me, the patent holder. Failure to comply would constitute a violation of intellectual property law, and continued use beyond that point would have legal consequences. I signed the message formally and professionally. Emma Linford, inventor of the Nexera BICE 2.3 system architecture, patent number USN 9-347-1. I copied legal, our former CTO, and Max. Then I closed my laptop and went for a 6-kilometer run, weaving through foggy streets, dodging tourists and street vendors, feeling the tension leave my body. Sunday afternoon, my phone started lighting up. 2 missed calls from an unknown number. A voicemail from HR. Emma, we hope we can clarify a few points regarding your exit agreement. Another message from the legal team. Please contact us as soon as possible to discuss the terms of your previous agreement with the company. And finally, late that night, an email from Max himself. Subject: Urgent misunderstanding regarding contract. Emma, I think there's been a misunderstanding. I'd like to speak with you directly to clarify the situation before the workday begins on Monday. Please call me ASAP. Max. There it was, the panic. I didn't reply. Let them stew in their uncertainty. Let them get to Monday and discover that the company's entire infrastructure, the scheduling system, the CRM, the API integrations, the automated reports, the client access portals, all depended on a license they no longer held. I wasn't seeking revenge. I wanted respect. And if that respect came in the form of frantic emails and a legal crisis, so be it. By the time Monday arrived, I had been awake for hours. Coffee made, phone charged, laptop open. Sitting on my couch in leggings and a t-shirt, watching the clock tick closer to 8 a.m., the official start of the workday at Nexera. At 8:07, my inbox exploded. System error. Backend authentication failure. Urgent. Client unable to access dashboard. Emma, please call me now. Max. Then a text from Nicole, an old friend in product. Was it you? Please tell me it was you. Max is losing his mind. The entire system is down. Meetings canceled, clients calling nonstop. The board knows. I smiled. Not out of malice, out of clarity. This wasn't sabotage. This was what happened when people in power assumed competence without proof and dismissed value without understanding it. At 8:31, my phone rang. This time, I answered. Emma. Max's voice crackled over the speakerphone, a forced calm that couldn't hide the panic. We need to talk. I had no idea about the patent situation. We want you back in the office. I interrupted him, gently. I'm happy to talk, Max, but not about a job. We're talking licensing now, as external counsel. Silence. Emma, he said again, his voice lower. Let's not make this personal. Oh, I replied. It's not personal. It's contractual. And I hung up. And so began the real negotiation. I walked into the Nexera building at 9:01 Monday morning, not through the employee back entrance, but through the main lobby. My heels clicked on the marble, firm and deliberate, a sound unfamiliar to me after years of slipping in discreetly with a thermos and a backpack. This wasn't a return. It was a reintroduction. Emma Linford, I smiled. I have a meeting with legal. The receptionist nodded quickly, visibly nervous, and picked up the phone. Her hand trembled slightly as she dialed. I felt the shift in the atmosphere. Conversations paused. Sidelong glances from employees pretending not to look. Take the elevator to the 7th floor, she said. They're waiting for you. As the elevator doors closed, I saw my reflection in the mirrored panel, confident, serene, but underneath the surface, my heart was beating hard. Not with fear, with focus. I'd spent the weekend preparing for this moment, not just to defend my work, but to define my worth. When I entered the legal team's conference room, the tone was cautious. The company's general counsel stood to greet me, followed by 2 members of the in-house team and a senior advisor I remembered from an old merger. Max wasn't there. I sat at the opposite end of the table. Let them come to me. Emma, the general counsel began, his voice smooth but measured. We appreciate you coming in. We want to get ahead of this and resolve it amicably. Of course, I replied. I also prefer clean resolutions. I assume you've reviewed the licensing agreement. He nodded. We have. Your claims are valid. The system patent is registered in your name, and per the agreement, continued use without your consent constitutes a violation. The renewal date passed as you indicated, at midnight. There was a pause, then he leaned forward. We'd like to propose a retroactive license extension. 1 year. Same terms. Full operational access. I smiled. That won't work for me. A murmur went through the room. The advisor scribbled notes quickly. I'm not here to return on the same terms. Go on, he said calmly. You're currently experiencing a system outage, I presume? Correct. They hesitated. I've been informed it's affecting all client-facing platforms, internal reporting, and developer access. The general counsel finally nodded. Right then. Let's talk numbers. I want $1.2 million for the next 12 months. Non-exclusive license, renewable quarterly. Full system support, directly with me or through a consulting team I approve. And a public acknowledgement of the patent in the company's official documentation. It wasn't a bluff. It was a market-aligned figure, considering the scope and impact of the system. The silence in the room told me they hadn't expected me to come prepared. At least, not like this. One of the legal associates cleared her throat. That represents a significant increase. It's a reflection of value, I replied, something this company has forgotten how to measure. The general counsel leaned back in his chair. We'll have to present this to the board. I'll wait, I said simply. But just so we're clear, every hour of delay impacts client trust, your reputation, and your stock trajectory. I advise you to move quickly. They didn't argue. At 10:03 a.m., while waiting outside the meeting room with a bottle of water and my phone on silent, I saw Max pacing in the hallway beyond the glass. He hadn't seen me yet. When he did, his expression froze. Then it shifted. First confusion, then something else. Recognition. He walked toward me, his steps slower than usual. Emma, he said, his voice strained toward cordiality. I didn't expect you to come in person. No, Max, I replied calmly. You didn't expect a lot of things. I think this has gone too far, he started, hands in his pockets, feigning casualness. We should have talked before involving lawyers. You mean before you fired me? I raised an eyebrow. That decision was based on incomplete information. No, I said, standing up. That decision was based on ego. And now you're facing the consequences. He opened his mouth again, but I didn't give him the chance. I'm not angry, Max. I'm simply tired of being underestimated. I documented everything. The patent, the license terms, your email firing me without cause. I'm not here to argue. I'm here to negotiate. If you want to salvage this deal, and maybe your job, let legal do their work. His jaw tightened. He rejoined the legal team, heading back into the meeting room. Today, Max, I said, turning over my shoulder. Good luck. That word again, luck. Something I never needed. By noon, the meeting room was full again, only this time the energy was different. Tenser. Sharper. The board wasn't present, but their shadow was felt behind every word from the legal team. What was once a misunderstanding was now a full-blown legal crisis, with operational consequences and shareholder repercussions. I didn't blink. The general counsel sat across from me, looking less polished than before. Tie loosened, jaw clenched. We've reviewed your proposal, he began, his tone measured. And while we consider the terms aggressive, adjusted, I corrected. He paused, nodded. Fair. We're prepared to accept the licensing fee with one condition. A 6-month contract, renewable quarterly, as you suggested. Regarding the public acknowledgement, we'd prefer to present it as a technical collaboration. Instead of full credit for the patent? I leaned forward. No, his eyebrows rose. Excuse me. I want it clear and public. System designed and patented by Emma Linford. No embellishments, no softened language. The company ran on my architecture for 6 years, and everyone benefited from it. I'm not walking away nameless so Max can save face. The room went silent. The legal associate to my left glanced at her notes, but didn't say anything. The advisor scribbled furiously. The general counsel adjusted his glasses. We'll take it to the board. Do that, I said, picking up my folder. And while you're at it, I advise transparency. The SEC doesn't appreciate unreported licensing conflicts impacting system functionality. That landed like a hammer because that's the game. No one wants to publicly admit that a system failure, especially due to individual IP usage, could shake investor confidence, trigger audits, or worse, generate delisting threats. I knew their playbook better than they did. And now I had my own. As I walked out into the hallway, I saw Nicole again, this time in a corner near the elevators. She gave me a look, half shock, half admiration. They're calling you, the fireball up there, she said with a grin. I smiled faintly. Better than being called redundant. She laughed, then lowered her voice. People are talking, Emma. Max is in full damage control mode. He's telling the board it was all a misunderstanding, that you never informed anyone about the license expiration. That's a lie, I said calmly. But the truth doesn't need volume. Nicole leaned in closer, conspiratorially. Everyone saw the memo. You CC'd legal, before the deadline. There are papers everywhere. The interns are talking about it like it's Watergate. I didn't respond immediately. My mind was already on phase 2. Because regaining control wasn't enough. I wanted accountability. The next morning, I sent a follow-up email. Not to legal, not to Max, but directly to the chairman of the board, using the address I'd quietly saved from an old initiative we collaborated on years ago. Subject: System license, public statement, and leadership conduct. I was respectful, factual. I outlined Max's decision to dismiss a key systems architect without reviewing internal IP obligations. The false narrative he was now pushing. I concluded with a simple question. If this is how he manages internal resources, how do you expect him to manage external partners, vendors, or regulators? That afternoon, the reply came. Not from the chairman, but from a senior liaison on the board. Emma, thank you for your clarity and professionalism. Please know that we're taking this very seriously. We will review the matter internally, with all the documentation you've provided. In the meantime, we support the licensing agreement and expect it to be finalized in 48 hours, under the terms you proposed. We regret that the company's leadership did not recognize your contribution sooner. I stared at the message for a moment, then leaned back in my chair. It wasn't a public apology, but it was a shift. Not just in the narrative, but in the power dynamic. Later that night, another message from Nicole. Max is ing. The board meeting is early tomorrow. His assistant says he's been calling in favors, trying to control the story. I replied slowly, let him try. I have the truth, and a paper trail longer than his resume. Tomorrow would be more than a licensing agreement. It would be a reckoning. The board met at 9 a.m. sharp on Wednesday morning. At 9:23, I was included. Not by Max, not by legal, but by the chairman of the board himself. The email was brief, but the tone was clear. Please join us for a private session at 11 o'clock. Your perspective will be valuable to the ongoing discussion. That word again. Valuable. 2 weeks ago, I was incompetent. Now, I was valuable. The irony would have been amusing if it weren't so telling. At 10:55, I walked into the executive boardroom on the top floor of the Exora building, a room I'd only been in once before, years ago, when I'd presented a system upgrade roadmap with the previous CTO. Then, I'd stayed in the corner, unnoticed. Today, I walked directly to the chair reserved for me, no hesitation. Max was already seated at the opposite side, arms crossed, his phone face down on the table like an accessory he wasn't allowed to touch. His tie was perfect. His smile, rehearsed. But the worry in his eyes wasn't fake. The chairman opened the session with formalities, then turned to me. Emma, thank you for joining us. We've reviewed the licensing terms and your documentation. We'd like to briefly hear your perspective before we deliberate. I nodded. Of course. I stood, unfolded my notes, but I didn't look at them. Instead, I looked each board member in the eye and said, leadership isn't about control. It's about clarity. It's about knowing the systems that drive your company, technical or human. When a new executive enters a system he doesn't understand, he has two choices, listen or bulldoze. Max didn't listen. He called me incompetent. He fired me without a review. And then he ignored the legal implications of the very infrastructure he relied on to keep this company running. Worse, he only started listening after a failure. After the servers shut down and the clients started calling. I let that sink in. Everything I did, every system I built, was designed to protect this company. But no system can protect you from arrogance. And if your CEO doesn't understand the architecture of your operations or the value of the people behind them, you're not just at risk legally, you're at risk fundamentally. Silence. Then, one board member leaned forward. What would you do if you were in his position? I smiled slightly. I wouldn't be in his position. I'd be beside someone who understands product, culture, and legal. I'd build a leadership model that values collaboration over control. And I wouldn't wait for a lawsuit to start respecting the people who keep this place running. There was a pause. Then the chairman cleared his throat. Thank you, Emma. You can wait outside while we deliberate. I stood, nodded to each of them, and walked out. 10 minutes later, I heard raised voices through the wall. Not mine. Max's. He was unraveling, deflecting, blaming legal, the CTO, even HR. That was his final play, diffuse the blame until it evaporated. But this time, it didn't work. At 11:47, the chairman emerged. Emma, we've concluded our session. We'd like to speak with you again, privately. I followed him back inside. This time, Max wasn't there. The chairman sat down and folded his hands on the table. Effective immediately, he said, Maxwell Granger has been placed on administrative leave, pending a formal review. We will be issuing a revised statement to staff, clarifying the situation and publicly acknowledging your contribution to Nexera's infrastructure and recovery. He handed me a printed draft of the official message. I read the first line aloud. We recognize the leadership, innovation, and intellectual property of Emma Linford as vital to the success of Nexera. It hit me harder than I expected, not because I needed the recognition, but because I knew how many women in tech never got it. "How would you like to proceed?" the chairman asked. "I've already accepted the license," I said. "But I'd also like to offer short-term consulting without returning full-time. I want autonomy, and I want to help you build protections so this never happens to anyone else." He nodded. "Consider it done." I stood up, and as I turned to go, he added, "Emma, you didn't just protect the system. You saved the company." I gave a slight nod. "I know." As I left the room, the weight that had been pressing down on me for days began to lift. Not all at once, but in pieces, like armor I no longer needed. In the hallway, Nicole was waiting. "He's gone," she whispered. I smiled. Suspended. For now. I looked down the hallway, toward the glass walls of the floor I used to work on. "I'm just getting started." The internal announcement went out at 2:03 p.m. that Friday. Effective immediately, Maxwell Granger has been placed on administrative leave pending a full investigation into recent management decisions, including termination procedures and contractual oversight. Nexera Systems also formally recognizes Emma Linford as the architect of our core infrastructure. Her patent and licensing terms are now part of our official operating agreement. We are grateful for her continued collaboration and leadership during this transition. The message was simple, but within the company, it landed like a thunderbolt. When I walked out of the building that day, the silence in the hallways had turned into cautious smiles, quick nods, murmured congratulations from people who hadn't met my eyes in weeks. It wasn't vindication I wanted. It was recognition. And more than that, it was change. The following Monday, I met with legal again. This time, not as a point of crisis, but to propose a new framework, a system that would safeguard internal innovations and protect employees from leadership malpractice. It included mandatory IP contract reviews during leadership transitions, anonymous whistleblower reporting linked directly to board oversight, and a mentorship program for junior engineers focused on ownership, recognition, and boundary setting. I didn't want to walk away with just a win. I wanted to leave something behind. Within a week, the consulting agreement was finalized. I would stay for 90 days, helping to stabilize the system post-panic and preparing the next lead architect to take over. My terms. My pace. People still asked if I'd return full-time. The answer was always no. Because while I loved the work, the company had changed, and so had I. One afternoon, 2 weeks into my new role, I was outside the building after a long meeting and noticed a group of interns walking by. One of them, a young woman with thick glasses and a nervous smile, stopped when she saw me. "Are you Emma Linford?" she asked. I nodded. Her face lit up. "I just wanted to say thank you. What you did is practically legendary. We talk about it all the time in the Slack channels. You made it okay for people to speak up." I smiled. "Don't wait for permission." She nodded and jogged to catch up with her group, leaving me with a strange feeling. Not pride, exactly. Something deeper. Legacy. That weekend, I finally allowed myself to exhale. Took a train out of town. Turned off my phone. Watched the world blur past the window. For the first time in months, my mind wasn't replaying strategies or contingency plans. Just silence. Peace. That night, I wrote in my journal for the first time since all this started. One line stood out. I never asked for power. I asked for recognition. And when they couldn't give it to me, I built my own table, instead of begging for a seat at theirs. In the weeks that followed, the news trickled in. Max's leave became permanent. The official language cited irreconcilable leadership differences. There were rumors of other complaints, other hushed-up firings before mine. The company culture started to shift, slowly but visibly. Exit interviews were being restructured. Internal training now included IP awareness and action. And for the first time, credit attribution was built into engineering milestones. Some executives tried to rewrite the story. "Emma was always part of the team," one said on a panel. We always valued her expertise. I didn't correct them. I didn't need to. The people who mattered knew the truth. Just like the code, the architecture I built still stood. And my name was finally where it belonged, in the system, in the credits, and in the story. Months later, I received a handwritten letter from the chairman of the board. Emma, you changed the way we think about leadership. Not by fighting, but by standing your ground. Thank you for showing us what true authority looks like. David. I kept it in the same drawer where I'd once kept my severance paperwork. A reminder of where I'd started and where I refused to end. Today, I run my own consulting firm. I work with companies that want more than flashy leadership. I want sustainable systems and empowered people. I choose my clients carefully, hold my own boundaries, and never sign anything without reading the fine print. Because in the end, this story wasn't about revenge. It was about value, visibility, and the quiet, steady strength of someone who refused to disappear when the system tried to erase her. So to anyone who has ever been underestimated, sidelined, or labeled difficult for simply knowing their worth, here's my advice. You don't need to shout to have an impact. You just need to know who you are and never surrender your power to someone who doesn't. Because when they fire you, thinking they've silenced you, all they've really done is light the fuse.